That sounded like I was projecting, but of course we are also recording tonight, right? Is that correct, Jorge? This will be later on when we get to questions from you, the audience. You will hear me repeat some of your questions. It will sound like unnecessarily. That is for the benefit of posterity, digital posterity. So it is wonderful to be here with you all. We're talking about Sam's fantastic new novel that I absolutely plowed through because I thought we were doing this on the last Wednesday of February initially. And so I was really ahead of the curve on this one. But Sam, how are you feeling?
Good.
Yeah, I'm very excited to talk to you about this book on this particular day because, as many of you will know, and I apologize if I'm breaking this news to you, but the McBarge has capsized in the Fraser River. The McBarge, which has been sort of marooned off of the Lower Mainland since Expo 86. For those of you who weren't here for Expo 86, the McBarge was the floating McDonald's at Expo 86, and just today it capsized. And I think of Expo 86 as like, among many things, it's definitely like a big borderland between Dave Wakeland and his mom. I would think of Dave Wakeland's mom as the kind of character who would see the city as having been all downhill since Expo. Many of us know that kind of Vancouverite, sure. The kind of Vancouverite who says, the city's just gone to hell ever since Expo. Expo's when everything, we opened the doors to the world and it all went to hell. Dave Wakeland isn't that guy. He loves a lot of what the city has become in that time, and yet he still does have some of that anger or resentment about the post-Expo years. What is Dave Wakeland's relationship to the post-Expo city?
Wow. Well, first of all, could we have a moment of silence for the McBarge? I think that you put it really well. That's one of the turning points, and every couple decades there's one. I mean, to me, and I think in my lifetime, the Olympics was the big one, where there's something about Vancouver that's not the same after that.
Right.
But I mean, like the more history you study, the more you see those patterns kind of resurfacing. And during the pandemic, there was such a virulent anti-Asian racism, and I just thought it was almost like going back 100 years because you read about like what the city was like earlier, and it like these things are always present. But after those kind of big moments, there's maybe like just a reckoning, or like they see that as like a point where you're kind of looking back more fondly.
Right.
But I mean there is so in this book, when I was writing this, Charlie and I went on a walk, and we were just talking about like how much Vancouver has changed, and he used this phrase that it kind of lost the smell of sawdust in the air, and I couldn't have put it better. In fact, I didn't. I just nicked it and put it right in the book because it. I think it really sums up just that idea that, like, when I think of the Vancouver that I knew, it's not that it was like this small town where everybody loved each other, but there was really like a working class sense of things. Like, you went to Granville Island and people were like making things. There were like people, just building or repairing, and now you go and like it's great. But you're going for like a $30 fish witch and a broom that costs more than your car. And,
well, I mean the parts of Vancouver that were the most working class, or the most industrial, Yaletown, like not too long ago. Granville Island, these were the kind of industrial, the main industrial kind of sites in the city proper, right? And I mean, now I guess you would see it in kind of what's been rechristened by realtors as like the River District on Marine, but this sort of the Fraser River, which is has always been a working river, is now kind of being reborn as a real estate river, and all of these parts of Vancouver that used to be the kind of jean jacket Vancouver and that kind of greasy fingered Vancouver are not only being gussied up, but they're actually like the sort of most resort town kind of West Coast Zurich parts of the city.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I just think about Stanley Park back in the day. There were always kind of like yoga wear people, whatever the precursor to that was. But like you'd just see like old hippies with like their kids and stuff. And I mean, this is where people went to escape the draft. So there's like so much history here that used to be reflected in the kinds of people who got to do stuff at so many of the kind of cool parts.
Yeah. I mean, you and I know, share a love for an inclusive Vancouver and a growing Vancouver. And yet one of the sort of things that's always imperiled whenever a city grows at a certain pace is that kind of social memory has to really be worked at to be kept alive. And one of the things about this book that is such a neat trick of Vancouver memory, and I'm wondering if you can speak to them as a presence and as a theme in the book. I mean, everyone will see that the cover has got this motorcycle. If you followed the Wakeland novels, you know that the sort of organized motorcycle club that sort of looms over the criminal underworld of Wakeland's Vancouver is the Exiles, who is this the first appearance of their full name because they're the Heavens Exiles, right? And have they ever been fully named that before this book?
I think maybe once.
Oh, okay. Because I was like, oh, that's where it's from. I was like hearing your friend Teddy referred to as Theodore for the first time or something. But the Exiles are like the outlaw motorcycle club who are the kind of terrifying presence right from Invisible Dead. We meet Terry Rhodes, but this is by far the most present they've ever been in the storyline. This is basically about Dave and the Exiles, and one of the kind of fascinating things about the role of bikers in Vancouver is that they're that old jean jacket kind of shit kick in Vancouver, but they're also the money laundering, real estate, empire building. Like, talk a little bit about bikers in the Vancouver that you're describing.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that's really interesting about West Coast biker culture, and I am not a biker, nor do I claim to represent them or anything like that. It's all made up.
Are you now, or have you ever been?
But when you read about like Montreal biker, like the wars that they fought, that didn't happen as much here. Like in Canada or in Vancouver, there were a lot of people who just kind of came up the coast from California and just liked it and stayed. So yes, they kind of patched over some of the local gangs, and but it wasn't this like war. It was like a very subtle thing that happened, and along with the cultural change was this really insidious organized crime element that is very sophisticated, that got into like online poker when that was big and strip clubs and all this stuff. And so like whenever I used to walk around, you know, anybody who kind of knew who owned a building would be like, oh yeah, that's owned by this guy, you know, he's a full patch, whatever. And so yeah, there is that sort of connection to the old Vancouver, but it's also like the worst part because it is kind of the like immoral and racist in some ways, and you know, evil in some ways. But I also like the fact that they're kind of respectable now, and part of that is because we look at white organized criminals differently than we look at ethnic organized criminals. But also, it's just because they've been here so long. They're all like the old boomers who own all the good real estate, and so there is this real doubleness to that.
Yeah. This question struck me earlier, and at first I was like, no, that's a corny thing to ask. And then I thought, well, no, I'm going to ask it because I genuinely am not sure what the answer to the question is. So it's got to be at least a little bit interesting to think through. Who would Dave Wakeland be voting for in the current civic by-election? Would he be voting, and if he voted, who would he be voting for?
Oh man,
because like Ian Rankin, was asked, you know, would Rebus vote for Scottish independence, and where would he stand on devolution, and where would he, and his whole thing was that to him Rebus is a small C conservative, and so not a conservative in the sense of like a party loyalty, but just somebody who thinks like stick with how things are, a kind of world weary kind of cynicism of, you know, I've seen it all, this is the way of the world, I'll try and carve out a little part of it that I can make right or whatever. And I feel like well, I was thinking about Dave's politics as they might graph onto the current moment, but I want to, like, to you, what are you taking as given that Sam Wiebe is not Dave Wakeland, and that this is not your endorsement for the civic election?
Well, wow. There's like nothing I can say that's going to boost book sales, is there? You know, I think during COVID, I went on a Zoom funeral with my great uncle Cliff, and during his funeral, his wife said, you know, the only three things that he loved in life were like his family, Macmillan Bloedel, where he worked for years, and he was like a shop steward and stuff, and then like the social credit party. So I feel like
that is the most British Columbian obituary I have ever heard in my life.
So I think that there's a real working class ethos that Wakeland has, where it's about showing up and doing your job, but it's also about trying to put yourself into the other person's point of view. Yeah. So I would say he'd be in the like older style of NDP voter to me, but I also coincidentally would maybe put myself in that. Sure. But I think that's about as good as I can. Yeah, he'd like them all equally. Because so many good choices. There you go.
How can I pick just two? Because the reason I was thinking about him is like, I mean, first of all, there's at least one candidate in the current election who is like a character straight out of a Wakeland book, which is, you know, Kaiser's is the former police union, head of the police union, and like his campaign is unfolding the way a subplot of a Wakeland book would. I mean, it's fascinating. But I also think like Dave Wakeland has this, I think of him as he's a cosmopolitan NIMBY. Like he's not a, and this is I think what I was getting at with the expo thing. He's not a nobody's welcome here. I don't want it built in my. He does oppose every change that he sees in the city, and yet he's quite at home in the Vancouver that has resulted in. Like he loves all different foods. He feels comfortable with all different people from all different walks of life. He bristles at bigotry of any kind, like anti-ethnic bigotry, but also class bigotry and all that kind of. He is a kind of bundle of contradictions in terms of his relationship to the city. Are those your contradictions too?
Well, some of them definitely. I don't know. Are we on the third one?
Yeah.
It's. I mean, I don't know if it's NIMBYism, but it's definitely. I think that he has a real problem with the powerful, like just whoever it is, and part of that is a real like do-gooderism, which is laudable, but part of it is also just that like punk rock. I didn't grow up rich, and I kind of hate anybody with a nicer car than my Civic. So I think some of it is a little bit self-destructive and contradictory, but it does come from a part of like wanting everybody to get something. But
this book is also, more than any of them so far, about Dave Wakeland realizing that he needs help. And he is, without wanting to give anything away, there are moments in this story that I think some authors would not have made the same decisions you did, because the most exciting real estate in a scene does not always go to Dave Wakeland. There are moments at which kind of key moments where help comes from outside.
Yeah, I mean, he is.
And I mean that emotionally as much as I mean that in terms of the kind of jeopardy of the story.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I did consciously want to do with the series is make it so that you don't have to read all of them to like catch up. So each one is a little bit of a restart. So if you've read the other ones, like this one hopefully is just as good. But if you're starting with this one, it's a guy landing in the place he used to live.
Right.
So it's him coming back to Vancouver after being away. And so he does have to reestablish himself. And part of that is being aware of what he's good at, and also being aware that there are times where he has to ask for help. And the characters around him are not always there to help him. Like there is no sidekick in the book. Jeff Chen, as his partner in this business, has a life of his own, and he's somebody where Wakeland thought he was leaving town with everything wrapped up, and he comes back, and the business that they formed is now in debt, and it's up to him to kind of take over some of the slack of that. So yeah, it's sort of about like asking for help, but also having to step up and do your part, even when it's a real ugly reality that you're not going to be happy with. And I like the compromise. I like the fact that it puts him in a place where if he wants to stay, there is kind of a devil's bargain he has to make.
It was very clear to me the whole time I was reading. Yeah, I could give this to anybody. I could recommend this to anybody. They don't have to have read the first four. And yet, if you've read the first four, there's real character growth. There's real complexification of the storylines that have been. So how do you do that? Like, how do you pull that off as a trick across stories that are not building at a plot level, but are complexifying at the level of character, and at the where there is real serial growth.
Yeah, it's hard. It's not easy.
No.
I think it's about figuring out what I can take away from him, and also like what is a way that's going to challenge somebody that's different. Because just seeing a guy like fight the toughest guy in the room over and over again is not all that interesting.
No.
But having him have to, deal with somebody who's like an economic bully, or who has the, like a police union behind them, they just challenge him in different ways. And my hope is that by the end of each one, like, it's been a really satisfying mystery where you're not really guessing who the killer is. But also there's something that changes him a little bit. And then the next book will be starting with that.
Is that, what level of interest do you have? I mean, both as a reader of crime fiction and mystery, like would you describe yourself as a mystery writer, or do you say crime writer, like, or do you use them interchangeably?
Yeah, I use them interchangeably.
Yeah, and do you have any kind of interest in the like actual kind of gameplay of like whodunit? Do you picture a reader trying to sort out what the pieces are, like trying to beat Wakeland to the solution, and do you feel that you've constructed a story where they could actually do that, or is that to you just not an interesting part of the enterprise at this point in the life of the crime novel?
I mean, I love when you can surprise someone. But my hope is also, if you're not surprised, you still enjoy it. I know with Cut You Down, like with the second one, there was kind of a twist about halfway through the book. And there are people who are like, oh, I guessed it. I knew that was coming. And it was, like if that ruined that for you, I'm sorry. But I think a lot of people realize that like the twist is acting on Wakeland. Like, it's not about the reader as much as like he is surprised by this.
Right.
And then the second half is how he deals with it. But I mean, the mechanics of mystery writing, I love that. I'm not good at it in the way that like Agatha Christie is, and I don't like to make the characters act in ways that aren't realistic just to fit into like a locked room puzzle.
Yeah.
But I do put a lot of work into like, okay, what would be a surprising yet satisfying way to end this?
Because I don't feel like I don't approach the Wakeland books as puzzle boxes. Yeah. Like they're not, they and there are some books that I read that way, and they have that kind of. Although I'm usually in it more for the kind of the language and the setting and if there's some kind of Agatha Christie or Dorothy Sayers or something, it's just as much for the kind of to be in another time and place, and there's always the satisfaction of listening to the detective, propound this ingenious retrospective explanation of everything that, but the Wakeland books don't really have that. Like, there are loose ends in the sense of like, not loose ends kind of plot wise or like hanging chads of the mystery or anything like that, but there are emotional notes that don't get, like, there are minor chords that don't get turned into major chords by the end of this book. There are things that get set up that don't get like satisfyingly so that you just get to breathe easy and everything's fine. It's not a book that gets all neatly tied up.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I write out of the Raymond Chandler school, which is, he's a very literary writer. It's all about the atmosphere and the voice, but there is a mystery there, and I think the mystery is what keeps it honest, without like adhering to without telling a good story, without having a murder or a crime and clues and suspects and all that. It would just be a guy griping about how the udon place on Robson isn't as good as it used to be. But having a mystery, first of all, just character-wise, it puts him in contact with people who are in crisis, with a real dynamic range of people, which brings different things out of him, so I get to show different parts of his character. But it also keeps it honest, where, yeah, I can have little excursions where, you know, he goes over to Bunsen Lake and just gets to hang around for a minute, but then it's coming back and tackling some aspect of the case again.
I mean, the other thing that I think puts you in the Raymond Chandler school and puts Wakeland in the Marlowe tradition of PIs is that hypocrisy and duplicitousness are the biggest sins of the Wakeland world. Like, we meet a lot of flawed people in this.
Murder too.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. It goes murder and then hypocrisy. But like, there's a kind of, you know, there's something about, you know, there's a character in this story who we watch in relationship to Dave, who has a potential redemptive arc, specifically in their relationship with Dave, and whether or not they follow that through. Do you see how I'm respecting your spoilers here on the, yeah. But I mean, you really do have to, you know, honor my work of protecting the spoilers by picking up a book afterwards. But, you know, that arc really, the way it comes off is about whether or not that character is willing to face who they really are and whether they can live to the cost of that authenticity, right? Like, Dave Wakeland is an existentialist, right? These are existentialist books in a way.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that to be flip, right? But they really are, and I think that's a tradition in noir.
Yeah, I mean, there are. When I started to write this and bring Wakeland back, like I said, I wanted to reestablish him as a character. And the worst way of doing that, I thought, would be like give him like this new family of like sidekicks and friends and stuff to rely on.
Right.
So he's coming back and he's thrown into positions he's never been in before. And mentorship is kind of one of that. Like there's a younger biker, like a hang-around, who's clearly being groomed to be an enforcer.
Yeah.
And he and Wakeland kind of have a connection because he can kind of see himself as like, oh yeah, you grew up in this kind of household and this neighborhood. And whether or not that character, you know, redeems himself, like that might be something that'll happen in later books.
Right.
One of the most beautiful thing about writing a mystery series is that if you do leave something like that, you can just leave it for a book or two and come back, and people are like, oh, you've been plotting this all the while.
Yeah.
It's like, no, like that character left my mind in 2018.
Yeah.
But I love that about a series. Like, I love that Jeff's, you know, in the very first book, Jeff's cousin is their, like, temp secretary at their fledgling private eye office.
Yeah.
And when she shows up in this book, she's a lawyer, and she's a legal aid counselor, and she's asking for him to work for her as an investigator.
Yeah.
There's something really cool about that and realistic, and that it's not like you're checking in with Kramer and Elaine every week, but when they do show up, it means something.
Well, but that's the thing, right? It's like there is that old thing about like the ways in which TV is actually more like life than the movies. I forget who said that thing about like that people say sitcoms are not authentic and films are more like real life. It's like actually we want life to be like a film where there's a journey and that by the end of it we've kind of undertaken some heroic act that changes us permanently and we move on for, when really our lives are, in the main, much more like sitcoms, where at the end of every half an hour cycle, we just all, the etch-a-sketch gets shaken and everything goes back to how it was. And you repeat the same patterns of behavior, and the relationships more or less stay the same. And you know, that is one of the things I think that is the most kind of like literarily rich about a series, is exactly what you're describing. The way you can build not only the concentric kind of social relationships around, or intimate relationships around a character, but also the kind of civic and social relationships around. Like you've built out Wakeland's city around him as well.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want anything in the books to feel cheap or like it didn't matter. Like if a character dies, it should have an effect on him.
Yeah.
So, yeah, part of fleshing out the world and having him interact with all these people is that they all do have like a little effect on him. And I do try to give them something realistic, just some depth.
So speaking of like things that happen that do and don't matter, because it would in some ways it would seem like, oh, book 4 ends with him leaving for Montreal,
yeah,
and book 5 starts with him coming back from Montreal. So it just feels like if you were just looking at that on paper, it's like, oh, it almost looked like you just kind of went into a little cul-de-sac and turned around, or like you're canceling out a decision that you made. But it's not that, because the return is the book. Like that his leaving and his coming back deliberately, it's because now he's no longer a Vancouverite by inertia.
Yes, yeah.
Now he's a Vancouverite by choice again.
Yeah, and that was really important with this, was to think of, what are the things that actually matter about Vancouver? Like, what's great about it? I mean, as corny as it sounds, like, the library, like, I remember when this building was built, and, people walked their books from what's now the Victoria's Secret, like they carted the books over to this.
At the time, it was just a mom and pop lingerie place.
But, so there's still the same like social critique, and it's not like things are great now in Vancouver, but it was a way for him to think like, okay, like if I have to live somewhere, like why here, and what is it that I love about here, and having him kind of reestablish that and fight for that, I think was really kind of an interesting thing to do. And the case of the book is about this woman who's been wrongfully accused of murder, and she's in custody, and the longer she's in custody, the more likely it is that somebody's going to kill her. So he not only has to like prove that she's innocent, but also just get her out of prison ASAP.
Yeah.
And that character, Maggie, she really represents that kind of East Van,
yeah,
like, at least one Italian grandparent, like, tomato vines from the old country growing in their Nanaimo Street, walk up.
Yeah.
And, like that, there's something like really magical about that. And I love that Vancouver is this kind of multicultural hub, that it had this like working class past, and that, the climate is so nice, you can just kind of go and hang out.
Yeah.
We kind of lose sight of that a little bit. At least I do. So it was a way to sort of be like, to just reaffirm that like, yeah, Vancouver's kind of great too.
Yeah. And I mean, as speaking of losing sight, I mean, we've been talking for 40 minutes now, and this is the first time we've talked about, I guess, the plot dynamics of the book in terms of Maggie being accused of murder and being in jail, and like, I think someone listening to this conversation, which has been aimed at a library audience, so we try to keep it cerebral, but might, come away with the wrong impression, like that this is like an essayistic book or like some kind of like turgid kind of Sam Wiebe's thoughts on contemporary Vancouver or whatever. But it's like, it is very propulsive. Like there's plot for days, and it's like, how do you go about balancing those responsibilities to the series you've created? Because I think people do come to the Wakeland books with a certain expectation that they are going to say something meaningful and incisive about the time and about the place. But they also expect to be able to read this on holiday and read it on the plane and actually have fun when they read it and not feel like they're eating their vegetables.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, it's a crime novel, and it has to entertain. Like, that's the most important thing that a crime novel has to do. You have to pick it up and want to read it and want to find out what happens. And I do try to put some stuff in there about what it's like to live in Vancouver, because that's important to me. I think it gives flesh and it gives heart to the mystery novel, but it's in the service of that. So the story has to come first, and it has to be a standalone thing. Like, I've read so many pulp novels, and there's one guy I dearly love, Lawrence Block, and he wrote something like 300 novels, 400 novels, and you can tell when you start some of them that he's like looking at the clock and like, okay, I can have this conversation for 20 pages if they talk about all the movies they don't like.
Yeah.
And so to me, like, I love those books, but I don't want to do that. Like, I want the story to be first and the characters to be the most important thing.
I was thinking about you in relation to Lawrence Block this afternoon, in terms of like your output. I mean, because you are producing prodigiously, and I think you have just hit this Blockian, I mean, ironically, given the name, because it is the opposite of writer's block. But I want to, wrap up our part of the conversation before I open it up to questions from everybody else. With a question about your relationship to your PI. Do you, as these books, pile up, do you feel closer to Dave Wakeland, or do you feel more remote from him? Like, the more you write him, does he feel more and more like somebody that you are kind of manipulating on the page to technical effect, or are you getting closer and closer to wearing his face as a mask?
Wow. I don't know if I'm wearing the face, but when I write the first draft and I read it back, some of the chapters are very close to me, and then some of them feel much more mechanical, and I have to revise both to make it feel like a Wakeland novel. Like, there is a tone that the books have that's serious. It's not super funny. There are moments of levity in there, I hope, but it's there's an idea that there's a consistency that I want to have quality-wise to them. But yeah, when I'm writing, it really just depends on the day, and sometimes it's very close to me, and sometimes it's bloodless and something that I have to do 3 or 4 drafts before I get it, so it feels appropriate for the character.
Right on. Well, with that, we have some time now to throw things open to questions from the floor. So, as I said at the beginning, I will repeat your questions, not for your benefit here in the room, but for the benefit of those watching in digital posterity. But if anyone has any questions for Sam, please fire away. Yeah, let's start.
Sorry, I came in late. Near the beginning, did you talk anywhere about how your books have been maybe will be on television?
The question was about whether or not the books will be optioned for film or television.
Yeah, so they've been optioned twice now, and the rights just went back to me. Basically, last year, the year before, there was a strike. We were very close to a deal with a network, and when we came back from the strike, that network's entire scripted division was gone. I still have something else under option, and the talks are ongoing. If you work in film and TV, please take my number. But it's going to be an uphill battle. Like every time something bad happens in the world, the CBC and the Canadian networks say, we want nice, light, fluffy shows, and this is just not one of those. And the last 10 years, by some standards, have just been unremitting misery. So I'm waiting for the time when things are good, and they're like, yeah, we should have a dark show on.
Yeah. Sam's working on a crypto sitcom. Actually, there is a little Easter egg in which hopefully you don't mind me, but at one point Sam describes Granville Island as would be a great setting for a light, cozy mystery series, which Sam and I have a whole pitch for a cozy mystery series starring Nancy Robertson and Hiro Kanagawa that we have so far unsuccessfully tried to sell. But so there is also a little mini pitch in the book as well when you come across that line. There was a question just in front of yeah.
Just wanted to know, like, what boundaries are you not willing to go beyond, like, taboo in your books?
So the question was about if there are any boundaries or taboos beyond which Sam does not feel comfortable going in the books.
Well, I think it's less of a taboo, but just I'm more interested in like the effect of violence. So when I write about that, I try not to have a lot of like cool guy, he fights 6 guys with one hand tied behind his back kind of thing. It's more just because I find the effects of violence more interesting to talk about. As far as like content, they're like Invisible Dead is easily the darkest of the series, and I think that tonally that was appropriate for that subject matter. If another idea came up that was dark, I would full-heartedly go for it. But I mean, they all have murder in them, so they're all somewhat dark. I was doing a talk the other day, and the guy introducing me was like, "Oh, so you write about murder? Probably, you're making up more murders than are actually in the city." And it's like, no, there's far less. Like, I mean, I can't get to them all.
Yeah. Speaking of Invisible Dead, I will say what I did text Sam right after I finished the book, which was that, I've loved all the books. We talk about them a lot, and so I didn't put this. I put this in in a way that I hoped was not hurtful, but I said that Invisible Dead had been my favorite until the Last Exile, which is now I think my favorite of the series. It is a very special book. But Invisible Dead, I mean, they're all wonderful books. But we were talking before the event began about the excitement that comes with the first book in a series, and no other book in that series ever gets treated with that same, it never arrives with that feeling of newness. It never has that kind of...
Yeah, there's that, every mystery author's career that I know goes through the same thing, where the first book, there's a big to-do about it, and then book 2 comes out and tanks because nobody's interested in it because it's not new, but it's also not an established series. And if you hang in there long enough, you start to crawl out of that. And, my hero is Ian Rankin.
Yeah.
He said that it took him until book 7 or 8 to hit his stride, to have people really, just realize how good they were. So this is book 5, and I'm slowly crawling my way. But yeah, it's I just like writing them.
Yeah.
So that's really the feel for it.
Well, we like reading them.
I love all your books that you told me before. This one was super fun. I picked it up at your book lunch, and the family came to text. I basically ignored them. So it was good.
Sorry.
I love all the Wakeland books. It's so much fun to cruise around Vancouver and the suburbs and be in the mystery. They're totally entertaining. I love your critique of the city and how it's changing or not. It's not still there. And just the details are so much fun. So I'm interested in how you choose parts of the city, and then when it's something that's not familiar with me, I feel like, oh, I need to go and drive there and see if that's actually a real place, or was a real place, or it's part of it fictional. And then I'm fascinated with Kirk and the gang, and I'm curious, how do you know about the gangs? How do you gather that material?
So I don't think I can do full justice to first a very kind and accurate preamble about the wonderfulness of the books and this book in particular, and then there was a kind of sort of a kind of halfway between a comment and a question about the relationship to space and the description of spaces in Vancouver, and I think the importance of those for the experience of the local reader reading about spaces they know and potentially encountering spaces that they don't know, and then that kind of relating to these sort of elements of Vancouver life that most of us by definition don't know because they're underground, the kind of criminal world, and wondering how it is that you come to this sort of confident enough knowledge to sort of write about them with such gusto.
Well,
Like, have you been to a cockfight is what we're all really wondering.
no, I did research on that.
Okay.
There's also a wonderful novel by Charles Willeford called Cockfighter, which is literally about that.
Oh, wow.
Treating it like a rocky, guy,
Oh,
hard scrabble guy comes up. But as far as places in the city, I mean, that's another thing where, the opposite of the float homes is Tinseltown, where you're just
Yeah.
like, how is this place still here? And it's
Totally.
brought me in the book because I just love it so much. I mean, it's the best theater, and we go there for trashy food, and it has the scariest washroom in the. But I hope that if you are from Vancouver and you read the book, you get a kick out of seeing the city reflected. And if you don't know the city, it's just this nice local color that makes it a fun read. Thank you. I think somebody.
yeah, one here and then one down here.
Yeah, and I confess I've only read the first Wakeland novel, so it's coming from that, but really reminded me of Adrian McKenty's Sean Duffy novels.
Oh yeah.
And just if no one's familiar, it's 80s Belfast, a Catholic detective living in a very Protestant area. And just that idea of kind of a city at war in a way, and a detective kind of thinking he could save it whilst kind of destroying himself. And I just wonder where you think Wakeland fits on that, saving the city, compulsion, and destroying himself knowledge.
Well, that's great. I mean, I think that Sunset and Jericho is really the book that brings that to a head. Because
Yes.
It's really about a guy who is so fed up with how broken the city is, and frustrated with it, that he wants to leave, and the case that kind of makes him finally do that. But with this one, it's about fixing your little part of it. I don't know if that makes him a NIMBY, but a YIMBY.
Right.
But just to look, I can't fix the justice system, but I can get this lady out of prison because she doesn't belong there. And also I see something of myself in her, and I want to make sure that part of the city is protected. Thank you. I love Adrian McKenty. It's awesome.
Yeah, Terry.
Sam, I'm curious if you've ever had anyone at an event like this who is actually very familiar with that side of Vancouver, like,
Okay.
who has commented or
Yeah.
given you the creeps.
I've been given the creeps several times. But I'll tell you a great story. So in the book, there's a little part where they talk about this older retired biker and his wife going out for drinks at the Joe Forta's chop house and getting, like, you know, some nice tequila and stuff. And I was talking to a guy whose father was a convicted something or other, full patch something or other, and he was just like, dude, you know, I've heard you read that, and it was like, oh, I was there, like, that's what we used to do back in the day, man, just get shots of Patron and the Joe Forta. And he's like, how'd you know that? I was just like, I was just reading about Joe Forta, and he seemed like a nice guy, and I always walked by the restaurants and put it in, but it had nothing to do with insider biker.
I thought their night out was so realistic. It was so, it just rang so true. I was like, this is exactly what
Yes, yeah.
non-old money, rich people
Yes.
in Vancouver, like, this is it, exactly. This is like blue-collar money.
Yes.
This is how, they just nailed it.
Yeah, thanks. And I mean, so part of it is just research, but, you know, I've talked to people and, you know, on the police, and I was a juror once, and yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of weird research that goes into it. You know, Charlie here is an enforcer for the Calabrian.
Yeah, that's why things aren't going very well for the Calabrians in town anymore. I think we have time for one more question. If anybody's got, you got it.
What's your favorite book in the series?
Oh, wow. This is an excellent question. This is like asking which one of your kids is your favorite. The question is, Sam, do you have a favorite book in the series? And I'll point out, there's a pile of The Last Exile being sold by Iron Dog Books in one corner, but don't let that influence your answer.
Now there's no way I can say it's legit. But it is. I feel like Sunset and Jericho and The Last Exile are the truest to what I want out of a PI novel. So I'm very happy with those two, and I'm excited with the direction where it's going. So, yeah, I mean, like, yes, on one hand, I love them all equally. On another hand, well, I only have two hands, but, you know, it's, the newest one feels the most interesting to me, and I think that it's the best jumping on point for the series.
Without putting anything in the rear view,
Yeah.
these last two, especially taken together, they really do feel like a culmination of, like, if there is a thesis of Dave Wakeland, like, if it's like, this is what Dave Wakeland both stands for as a character, but also delivers as a series, it's in this book.
Yeah, I think I've figured it out more than I had before. And there's still work to be done, but it's getting better. I promise.
How about a big round of applause for Sam Wiebe, everybody? Thank you all so much for sharing your Thursday evening. Sam's going to be signing books. They're being sold by the wonderful Iron Dog Books. You can find an even bigger version of Iron Dog Books with walls and ceiling and everything on East Hastings, just past Nanaimo Street. A beautiful jewel of Hastings sunrise this evening with the books you really need. A smaller version of Iron Dog is here with your Sam Wiebe literature. He will sign it for you. Please do pick up a copy. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Let's hear it one more time for Sam. Good night.